Tonight, we welcome special guest, Suffi mystic Kamran Pasha. We'll be discussing the Dark Djinn. What are these beings and what drives them? Kamran has investigated and confronted the Djinn and has lived to share his experience and knowledge about this misunderstood force that walks the space between our world and the next. Kamran is a Suffi mystic and a Hollywood filmmaker, and he's here this evening on Darkness Radio. Welcome to the program. All thank you very much for joining us. I know this is a little different for the live program to be coming at you on a Tuesday night, but I am off to the Michigan Paracon this week. I leave on Wednesday and I'm gone, and then I leave from Michigan Paracon to start filming a new project that I have to kind of remain mum about at the point. But I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight and spending a little time with us here for the live video podcast. For those of you tuning in, it is our Thursday show. We had a big, nasty-ass rainstorm that came through when we were pre-recording this week, and it knocked me out being able to pre-record a normal show. So thankfully, we had this one lock, stock, and barrel ready to go, and this is your Thursday presentation. So thank you again for being here with us. As I mentioned in the opening, tonight we're joined by a very special guest, and he is a Suffi mystic. That's something new to me. I'm not sure what that is. We're going to find out together tonight, and we're going to discuss a part of the supernatural and paranormal realm that many may not be familiar with. I know there's been a glut of movies that have come out now about the last 10 years, but a lot of people are still not exactly sure what is a Djinn. I know my introduction to the Djinn was probably like most of you, watching I Dream of Jeannie and seeing that Barbara Eden was up against the Blue Djinn, the mighty Blue Djinn, who was kind of appeared to be the overlord of genies at the time. And that was my only introduction to the character and understanding of it. But I always knew he didn't seem like he was a real nice guy. We've had Rosemary Ellen Guiley on our program in the past, the queen of the nighttime world, and she certainly was a believer in the Djinn, and we discussed these concepts with her. But I've never had somebody that's actually had to face an exorcism and dealing with the Djinn. So we are lucky to have our guest joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Podcast, the one, the only, Kamran Pasha. Kamran, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show and a big fan of yours, Dave. I've been watching you since Holzer Files, and you know, as you know, I'm a friend of our mutual friend Cindy Keza, and so it's just an honor and a delight. I've been in the chat many times on Darkness Radio, and so it's nice to be actually on screen for the first time.
Well, it's a real honor to have you join us. Let's start from the beginning. Explain to me, what is a Suffi mystic?
Sure. Well, Sufis are the mystics within the Islamic tradition. All religions have a mystical element. There's always the sort of external element that's often about rules and rituals and laws and all of that, which is the form of religion most people understand in their personal lives, right? But every tradition has within it a mystical thing. And mysticism is about direct experience of the divine. And, you know, all of our holy figures, that's what they brought to people. They brought a direct experience. That's how religions were born. People felt something in their hearts that connected them to God. And so within Islam, there's the Sufi tradition. And in Christianity, there's the Gnostic tradition. In Judaism, there's Kabbalah. So Islam has a Sufi tradition. Sufism has many origins to the word Sufi. One origin is that the early mystics of Islam would dress in very simple woolen clothes. The word suf means woolen. I mean, at a time when the Muslims were very rich and powerful and people liked to wear very expensive clothing, they would walk around in very simple sort of Jedi night robes made of wool. And so they would that's one origin. But I think the real origin actually comes from Christian mysticism. The word Sufi is linked to Sophia, which is the Christian word, a very early Christian word for the divine feminine, and it's mentioned in very early Christian texts, often talking about God as a Sophia. And, I actually just came back from Bulgaria where I was traveling, and the capital is named Sophia for that reason. So Sufis are a continuation in many ways of that sort of Gnostic mystical tradition that was in Christianity that had to go underground during various historical moments. It just wasn't accepted publicly. And so when Islam took over sort of the old Byzantine areas of the Middle East, those Gnostics essentially joined the mystical tradition that Islam was forming, and Sufism is a result.
All right. Now, how does one become a Sufi mystic? And I don't ask that lightly. I mention it because, with the advent of all the popularity of paranormal TV shows, suddenly there's all of these people claiming to be demonologists. And in many cases, I've pushed them to find out I've read many books. Well, I've watched ER and Chicago Hope and Grey's Anatomy. That doesn't make me a doctor or a nurse. So, when you become a Sufi mystic, what goes into that kind of training and understanding?
Well, Sufism, again, because it originates within the Islamic tradition from Islam's prophet Muhammad, who's a central figure of Islam. To be a real Sufi, you have to essentially be in the lineage of spiritual teaching going back to him. And so the traditional Sufi understanding of its origins is that the prophet had, the general religion for the mass populace. And then within some very close, intimate followers and family members, he taught these very profound inner truths that maybe the average public wouldn't necessarily grasp or misunderstand. And so especially his daughter, Fatima. I think Fatima is an interesting one because I believe you come from the Catholic tradition, correct? So
I come from the Christian tradition, but I'm familiar with Fatima, right?
Okay. So Fatima, as you know, is the name of a city in Portugal where people experience the Virgin Mary. And that's an interesting place because it's actually Portugal, like Spain, was under Islamic control for many centuries. And that city was named Fatima by the Arabs, actually, because on that same mountain where the children saw Mary, or who they interpreted to be Mary in the 19th century, early 20th century, people were seeing a holy woman there. Muslims were seeing a holy woman there on that same mountain, and they assumed it to be the prophet's daughter Fatima, who is the origin of Sufism, right? So it goes from Fatima and then her husband Ali, who is considered sort of great spiritual teacher of the Sufis, and through their children, through the prophet's descendants, became the primary teachers of this mystical knowledge in sort of private circles, and that's how it remained for the first few centuries of Islam until it became a very public thing. And at a certain point, pretty much all Muslims had joined Sufi groups. But it's in order to be a real.
Let me mention one thing. Isn't it interesting with the miracle of Fatima, right?
Yes.
Where the children saw what they believed to be the visage of the Virgin Mary. The Muslims believed that they were seeing Fatima, right? There was no denying that something was there. But it's interesting that we could all come together that this was just a moment of miracle and not worry about whose God, whose deity this was, but that there was something powerful.
And something feminine,
right.
Something sacredly feminine. It was, both religions on that mountain were seeing a holy woman, and they interpreted it through their own tradition, and it was communicated with them.
My understanding was that it was really just the three kids at first that saw them. When they asked one of the last visits, when they asked the Virgin Mary, Fatima, to make her presence known, that's when the sun began dancing in the sky and moving around. Did people then begin to see her as well, or was she still really only visible to the three children that claimed to be in her presence?
My understanding of it is the children are the ones that saw her directly, but others saw the miracles related to her. But again, the events that happened within Islam, because Muslims were no longer essentially a part of that town of Fatima by the 19th, 20th century. They had been expelled from Spain and Portugal some centuries before. So their traditions go back many earlier centuries when people in that town had similar experiences of seeing a holy woman and feeling communications from her. So this was the experience that happened on that hill, just repeated again in our modern times. That hill was sacred, but that shows the connection. Again, the Sufis are very deeply connected to Christian Gnostics and Christian mystics, right? And historically, Christian mystics have gotten very well with Sufis. St. Francis of Assisi traveled to the Middle East. He's very famous. He went to Egypt and he actually became very good friends with Sufi masters in the Middle East. And many of the Franciscan orders, spiritual traditions are very similar to the Sufi tradition. There's a lot of very similar rituals that seem to be cross-pollination.
Well, let's discuss the concept. Okay, so you've got these Sufi mystics, and is that basically the same as kind of a religious head, a pastor, a priest, a minister? Is it more of a healer? What exactly is the correct terminology? Okay.
It can be all of that. I mean, technically, you don't have to be any of those things. You're just having a personal one-on-one direct experience of the divine in your life. But the great Sufi leaders have historically been all of those things. They've been the imams, which are the prayer leaders. They have been the scholars, and they have been the artists, in particular artists. I'm an artist myself. I'm a filmmaker, novelist. And so in particular, mystics tend to gravitate towards art to express themselves. So yes, but many of them will be the strange figure living in the cave that the local people are like, I don't know about that guy, right? And that's a very parallel to a lot of Christian stories, parallel to a lot of Buddhist stories, the wise man on the mountain or the wise woman. There's quite a few Sufi female teachers historically. And so yes, and that their role is to just remind people of one thing, which is you definitely need the rules and the regulations of religions. Without that, you don't have a structure and a moral basis. But if you just have that, you have a little bit of a body without a soul. And so Sufism likes to see itself as the heart of Islam, which is, if you don't, one of the central ideas, there's a verse in the Quran which quotes God as saying, wherever you look, you see my face. So the Sufis want to say that let's try to experience that so that everything becomes divine. And so we, even in the sufferings of life, even in the people that hate us, we're seeing the face of God back at us. And what is he trying to teach us through these experiences we're having? And that makes you love humanity and not see humanity as, believers versus unbelievers. One of the most famous Sufi mystics who you may have heard of, his name is Rumi. Rumi is the great poet from Turkey, and he's actually the best-selling poet in America today. But he's a 13th century Turkish poet who's been translated in English, and he's just took fire in America. If you go to your Barnes and Nobles, there'll always be a Rumi section. And Rumi was what you said, he was a traditional Islamic scholar, but he was also this Sufi mystic who wrote this incredible universal poetry. And his followers were Christian, Jewish, Buddhist. Hindus would travel all the way from India to medieval Turkey to meet him. So Sufism seeks to be universal. It comes out of Islam, and it very much is associated with that. But all mystics, they see God everywhere. So they don't like to be limited by, you can't come join us because you're not part of our group. God is everywhere. How can you exclude anyone?
Reeling back, Anne Irish Bale asks, why is it that the children that witnessed the vision at Fatima, why is what the children were told by the being such a big secret? Now, two of the predictions were not big secrets. They let them out and explained what would happen in one of them. And there's a few great documentaries and movies about this. As a matter of fact, I think The Miracle of Our Lady of Fatima and a few others that have just come out even recently will show this. But in one of them, the Virgin Mary or Fatima told the children, you will live, these two will die, which is terrifying, right? When you consider this is a burden, but that there was a reason for this, and then these two children, two of the three children did pass away in succession. And this was it. But then there was the third message, which my understanding was the last person she officially told was Pope John Paul II. I think she lived through his reign. I don't know what the right term is. Right. Papacy. But and a lot of people believe it had to do with the end times. Sure. But why do you believe that a being like this would make themselves known, entrench the world in this, and then not share all of the messages that were given?
Well, it's hard to know the reasoning behind things in a mystical world, but part of it is also in the community it was revealed. I mean, the community it was revealed was a very Catholic community, and it was the Catholic Church that decided to be the guardians of that message. I don't know that the Mary or the Holy Woman that appeared there meant it to be secret. We know that the church decided that the message was something that needed to be kept secret, maybe because they felt the social implications would be too great. Maybe they felt that it would disrupt, if people knew about it, they would change their behavior and disrupt perhaps for the worse events that were meant to come about. But within all of our traditions, there is this concept of not everyone is ready for everything. Right? Not everyone is ready for everything. And we, you tell somebody who's a big egomaniac that God is within you, they're going to use that to say, yes, well, I can do whatever I want. And, I am God. So I can do whatever I want and rules don't apply to me. right? So those kind of profound mystical truths that about the oneness of God and your own inner, the God is inside of you, they're not generally communicated by mystics in these traditions to everybody, because there's a lot of people that are going to use them for the wrong things. In the Christian tradition, one of the most mystical gospels that was very popular, but the church decided didn't want to put it in canon, was the Gospel of Thomas, which is incredibly mystical, right? It's all these powerful parables that have many layers and meanings, right? And it was popular for the first 3 centuries of Christianity. And then in the Council of Nicaea, they said, you know what? A lot of people are going to misunderstand this. There's stuff in here that's going to mislead people if they don't have a teacher that's going to interpret it. So we're just going to not put this in and that was very controversial because it was a hugely popular text, just like the Gospel of Mark and Matthew and the others were. And when it was excluded, there was quite a bit of an uproar. And then it disappeared from history until it was rediscovered in the 20th century, essentially in a cache of hidden documents in Egypt. And so that's historically, there's a reason for that. And, you can criticize that and say, well, you're keeping the truth from people. And sometimes that may be a fair criticism. It all depends on the person keeping the secret and what their agenda is.
Right. That is strange, right? Because we also know the Book of Enoch is one of the most famous books that was kept out of the canonical Bible. There are many different truths to these stories. I feel that it's the elephant parts, right? The story of the elephant parts, where you tied up the 4 wise men and each came in and would tell you, one grabbed the trunk and said, oh, it's a rope. The other one, grabbed the leg, oh, it's a tree trunk, and the ear, and each one had a different interpretation of the existence of what it was that they were encountering. And it kind of felt like maybe that's what books that were removed from the canonical Bible, from the writings, were taken out because there were too many variations of the same truth, and everybody's got their own slant. We know eyewitness testimony in crime is questionable at best, because 3 of us could be standing there watching the same crime happen from 3 different perspectives and see it 3 different ways. So I wonder if they tried to just tighten it to what seemed to be the most commonality, the common thread through this, or there are some heretical comments if you look at the true tradition of the religion of things that were said in these books that had been removed. There's even stories of Jesus as a child kind of being kind of a jerk, right?
What's interesting is a lot of those stories of Jesus from you're referencing the infancy gospel.
Right.
Which about his life as a child and his miracles, and some of them are stories of him doing things. You're like, wow, Jesus is being a bit of a brat, right? But he has some interesting miracles in that gospel that are not in the mainstream Christian tradition, including that as a child, Jesus makes clay birds and breeds them, and they come into life. They fly away, right? That story is actually in the Quran. So a lot of the stuff that eventually didn't make it into the Christian canon reappears in the Quran. So a lot, and it's interesting that you reference the Enoch, the Book of Enoch, because that links us to our topic today about the jinn, because the story of how Satan fell in Enoch finds a parallel in how the Quran explains Satan's fall. So it's very interesting that text, which essentially vanished publicly, a very similar, almost exactly the same story appears in the Quran in the 7th century. So these ideas didn't go away.
Right. Now, we talk about these visions, and there have been many throughout history. Mm-hmm. But like today, how do we know that what we're dealing with is truly a representation of God, or the feminine goddess, male god, or one of the archetypes, and not something more nefarious, something meant to lead us? Because again, you're seeing an angel of light. Mm-hmm. Satan is called the light bringer, right? He is the morning star. He is there to dazzle, and he's beautiful. So it would be very easy. And most of these visages are bright lights, these figures engulfed in white light that you can't really make out. How do we start to differentiate between evil entities appearing beautiful and trying to gain our trust and true messages? Because if you look at the Fatima story from the other side, these kids were abused. They were treated poorly for a while. People thought they were insane. Mm-hmm. Then the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it became less about them. They were still treated not well. And then you've got the death of 2 of them. Why put that on children? It could be said this sounds more sinister than it does blessed. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about the Dark Djinn, the Djinn itself being something that seems to be able to manipulate itself.
They are very deceptive.
Right.
They can be very deceptive. We're going to talk about them. But, to answer this specific question, you've raised a very important point, Dave, because especially today, I live in Los Angeles, where there's all kinds of new agey weirdos running around. Everyone's got their story of how they're the reincarnation of Cleopatra. No one's ever the reincarnation of some random nobody, who died a miserable life. It's always like Caesar or Cleopatra. So everyone in LA has their story. And the way that in the Sufi tradition, the way that you can figure out truth, you have to have a teacher who's part of an actual lineage that has survived the test of time, going back to a holy figure. In the Islamic tradition, every Sufi order has what's called a silsila. Silsila means a chain. And this chain is the name of the teachers before your teacher. So you can track back your teachers 1400 years. So every Sufi teacher will be able to say, I was taught by this person who was taught by this person. And the chain goes back all the way to Muhammad. So you can claim it. There's only one exception where their chain doesn't start with the prophet, which is that there is a form of Sufism where the prophet will appear to you in a vision or a dream, and then he initiates you. And then you start a Sufi lineage. And the only way to test if that is true is if the lineage ends up being accepted by the other Sufi orders that can be traced back historically to Muhammad, right? And so in all of our traditions, I think it's very important to find teachers that have a lineage that has survived the test of time. Otherwise, you're very open to cults. You're very open to people that are making things up and taking things where Los Angeles was full of cults, right? Hollywood is full of them. And these are people that showed up and suddenly they read a few books on Buddhism and mystical this and that and put a couple of Kabbalistic things in there and voila, they've got their group and they're the new guru, right? But it's self-appointed. And historically, those don't tend to last beyond 1 or 2 generations because eventually they don't really have something solid to offer. So that's, I think, how you need a lineage, in my opinion.
Agreed. Right. Now, quick question. JML asks from the chat room, is jinn another word for demon?
So this is how I'm going to answer it. Yes and no. So the yes part is this. The original word for demon in the Greek that's used in the Gospels is daemon. Daemon was the original word. And that's a pre-Christian Greek word for a spirit that can be good or bad, that essentially whispers in your ear and inspires you. So the muses were daemons, right? So when Homer says he thanks the muse for helping him write the Odyssey, the Iliad, and all of those,
right.
It's his daemon that's whispering this. It's inspiring him. It's a spirit, and they can be mischievous and they can be evil. So there's a range of that. As Christianity developed historically, the daemon became demon, which has exclusively negative connotations. There's no real concept of a good demon, right? They're inherently evil. Whereas, so a jinn is, and I guess we can start talking about the jinn. The jinn are, in the Islamic tradition, the jinn are an intermediary race between angels and human beings. They have supernatural powers like angels, but they're made of a different substance. In the Quran, the angels are made from light, and they don't have free will. And so they, Gabriel, Michael, they just have to obey God. They're almost like robots. They don't have the ability to disobey. The jinn have free will like human beings, but they don't have corporeal form like us. And they're made of a substance which the Quran describes as smokeless fire. And some modern paranormal investigators equate that to plasma, right? I think Rosemary Guiley, who investigated this, equated that as well. And I've got some wonderful books on the jinn from her. So that is what they are. They're an intermediary race, and then human beings are the physical being race. And the Islamic tradition says, and this is where the similarity to the Book of Enoch begins, right? Which is the Book of Enoch talks of the great war between the angels and the fallen angels, right? And I believe that the story is that in the Book of Enoch, the initial event that happens is that when God creates Adam, Lucifer, who is an angel in that text, God orders all the angels to bow to Adam as the highest of creation, human beings. And Lucifer refuses to do so because he's a higher being in his mind. To him, this is degrading to bow to this piece of mud, right? And so he's expelled and begins this big war. So the Quran has a parallel story where the angels are ordered to bow to Adam, and Satan is amongst them, but he's not of them. He's actually essentially the king of the jinn, who's so powerful that he's been given essentially companionship with the angels. He's risen to that level. And he refuses because he has free will, which the angels don't. So Gabriel, Michael, everybody bows, whereas he's like, I'm not going to do this. This thing is beneath me. And I made a smokeless fire, and you've made this thing of mud, and it's beneath me. And so God expels Satan, who's called Iblis. which is that's the name of the being who becomes Satan. And Lucifer is the name in the Christian tradition. Iblis is the name of the Quran. And the word Iblis literally means he that despairs. So because he despairs of God's mercy, all he has to do is ask God's forgiveness. He won't do it, and so he despairs, and he'll never be forgiven. So Iblis is expelled, and he and his followers of the jinn represent the evil elements of the jinn, who are very much the open enemies of the human race. But there are other jinn that refuse to follow him. And so there are jinn that are good, and there are jinn that are just trickster spirits that are like Loki. They do whatever they want, and you can find that good or evil, but they don't really care, right? And so we can talk about how those different entities, I think, in my opinion, and I think many paranormal investigators today are beginning to see it this way, that they can be responsible for many of the forms of paranormal activity that we classify in the West differently: ghosts, Bigfoot, all these things. We could talk about that because they're shapeshifter entities, and we have classified them based on our understanding. But the Islamic tradition would classify all these paranormal beings as forms of jinn.
So is the jinn also in that kind of echelon of the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, that kind of, because you said it's the intermediary between the angels and the humans. And according to the Bible, you know, angels came down, they mated with humans, they created these giants, these aberrations, abominations. Would the jinn be part of that, or do they predate? I've heard that the jinn predate even the angelic story, that part of history.
In the Islamic tradition, they don't necessarily predate it. The angels come first, because first there's light. Let God say, let there be light, right? But they are the second creation. They're the second intelligent creation in the cosmos. And then, you know, I think we don't have a story in the Muslim tradition of angels mating with human beings, but there is very much a tradition of jinn mating with human beings. That's a living tradition today. I've been to West Africa, which I'll talk about, where my Sufi masters deal with jinn today. They deal with jinn exorcism. They told me directly some of the stories in their village of jinn mating with human beings and the consequences of that. And so that's happening in the Muslim tradition today. It's not just something that happened a long time ago. And yes, it can lead to a race of half human, half jinn beings that are essentially supernatural, which would be similar to the Nephilim kind of story. So they're very parallel. I saw someone in the chat was raising the question whether they're like archons, which is a Gnostic idea. And yes, I think archons are very similar
Right.
to jinn in the Greek tradition. Yes.
Nicole Garcia Giacomuzi says, although the jinn are rooted in Islamic beliefs, do you believe these beings might also be known as the archons, the watchers, demigods, and shadow people?
Yeah, I believe that these terms are how Western occultists have attempted, or paranormal investigators have attempted to label phenomenon they're experiencing based on their tradition and what they know. But I would include all of those entities as jinn, because the word jinn literally means invisible. It means that which you cannot see, right? And so all of these paranormal phenomena are normally invisible to the human senses until they manifest in some portion. So I would include them in all of that. I would use that as a rubric term. So Dave, forgive me, I've lost.
I'm sorry. Aiden asks, I wonder if the Grigori and egregores would be considered jinn as well.
You've actually hit a very profound idea there, because this is very deep Sufi teaching, but there are Sufi teachings that you can essentially create or take control of jinn through your imagination, which is what an egregore would be. We got a very nice car. We're living in Santa Monica, so cars fly
Fast and the Furious, yeah. All right.
This is Los Angeles. So I will say that again. There's a Sufi thing where you can learn certain meditative techniques that can actually influence that energy level from which the jinn come from, and essentially control a jinn who becomes the egregore, right, and plays that role. And so, yes, I think they are, because it's a rubric term for all paranormal activity that is not of the angelic realm.
Now, the jinn to me almost sounds like fibromyalgia, right? Fibromyalgia is this kind of umbrella comment. We don't really know how to break down what it is, so it's under the fibromyalgia. If we look at all of the aliens, Bigfoot, cryptids, ghosts, demons, shadow people, well, it could be all part of the jinn, but there are ghosts of grandma that are seen that show up and smile, and Cameron, I love you, and it's my time to go. Is that a jinn? Is that... do they coexist simultaneously, these beings and true out-of-body spiritual beings as well?
Well, one way to make it a focused way of it, so it doesn't just become an empty term, is I think all phenomena that is interdimensional in nature would be called jinn, because that's what they are. They live. The idea of Islam is that once human beings were created, essentially the jinn used to rule this world. This is very similar to Lovecraft's idea of the old gods, right? Lovecraft actually studied a lot of Middle Eastern mythology, and so and then when human beings arose, these beings were pushed essentially into another dimension. Right. And they've been sort of locked out of our world. They come in and out, but they can't really hold on to it. And so that would be one explanation why phenomenon like Bigfoot can't really be captured, because they disappear. And many Native Americans would suggest Bigfoot is a spirit creature, not a physical creature. That's why you can't catch it. Right. And so that would be the way I would connect these things. They're interdimensional beings. You've hit a very important thing about afterlife experiences in Islam. And there's two ways to look at it. I do believe, Islam has definitely the idea of the human soul and the soul leaving the body upon death. And very similar to Christianity, we have the idea of resurrection at the end of time when the soul reunites with the body and is physically recreated and judged by God. But there are definitely, within the Islamic tradition in general and the Sufi tradition in particular, there's many stories of communicating with spirits who've passed on, right? Holy figures. Like I said, the Prophet Muhammad will appear to people and initiate them in the Sufi tradition. That's that kind of authentic spiritual experience. When my father passed away, both of my sisters were both in the Middle East at the time, and I was in the United States. And as they're very grief stricken when I called them, and they got on the plane to come, and they saw my father in the airport. Right, with their own eyes. So, I mean, that's a very common. If I think people who've had that experience, someone passing away and then they see them right shortly thereafter, I think that's very common. And I think those are real experiences. There is the other trickster phenomenon, which is the jinn can imitate the souls of the departed. And so sometimes I've watched Paranormal Investigation. I think I've watched stuff on the Holzer Files where people say it's haunted by the ghost of grandma. And Cindy will say, I don't think this is grandma in here, but it's pretending to be grandma. So that's that phenomenon of the mimic, which has nefarious intention. So it'll take on the form of your loved one. And that's a real phenomenon.
How do we divine then between true spiritual beings that are the ghosts or disincarnate souls as opposed to a trickster? Is there really no way to do that?
I think it's hard for the average person. I think someone like a Cindy Keza, who's a medium, is able to sense the differences. Most of us, we're just overawed when we have an experience like that. But the question becomes, what does that experience lead us to? Does that experience lead us to a better life? Does it lead us to a positive experience? Does it lead us to healing and freeing of grief? Then I think that's likely to be a real experience from the actual spiritual world. If it leads us to sort of unfortunate circumstances, which brings in the question of what happened to those children at Fatima, was that actually Mary or Fatima or something in mimicking them, because they died shortly thereafter. So if it leads to tragic circumstances or guides us to behavior that we wouldn't normally do that's not healthy for us, then I think we're looking at a mimic.
It's terrifying when you look at the fact that a lot of people that we sweep away with mental illness, dealing with whatever name we want to give them, multiple personality, dissociative behavior, schizophrenia, that are seeing and hearing these voices. Do you think in some instances it is not just a chemical imbalance, but it is truly a spiritual attack from the jinn or beings like the jinn?
In many instances, it is. I know I have some close personal friends who are schizophrenic and have fought that. And so I've seen it up close and personal. And, on one level, it is absolutely a chemical thing. But on another level, when I've seen them in their states, they're very difficult to deal with in that situation. They're not interacting with us as we normally can deal with and know how to handle. At the same time, I've seen them say things and do things that suggest to me they're seeing things that are actually there from the other dimension. So I think in the Sufis have always been the psychiatrists of Islam or the psychologists. So we've often said that what often happens to people that we label as mentally ill, they are seeing into the hidden world. They just can't handle it. It overwhelms their senses. And so a great Sufi master came to America in the early 20th century, 1910. His name was Hazrat Inayat Khan, and his books are available on Amazon. They're still the best books on Sufism. And he was actually brought to a psychiatric facility, which was and this was 1910, 20s. Everyone's very proud of their what they thought was the most advanced science of the time. And a doctor showed him all the research they were doing on human brains in the early 20th century, and said, "Look, here's a brain of a mentally ill person who who had passed away. They're at the brain and they're examining it. And here we found this lobe is damaged in this way and that way. And that's the cause of the mental illness. And Inayat Khan, the Sufi, said to him, how do you know that his inner experience didn't alter his physical appearance of his brain? That he actually had a real experience and that changed the physical structure of his brain. And you're calling it mental illness and you're looking at you're thinking the effect is the cause rather than the other way around.
That's really telling as well, isn't it? Because we do know that the brain can change through experience. It changes the neural pathways. That's why NLP training and work is so important, but you can physically change and alter the ways that different aspects of the brain are accessed and from trauma, psychic trauma, physical trauma, mental trauma, that can have a deep impact on that. So you're right, you remove the cause, but not the symptoms in some of these diagnoses.
Yeah. Well, and to bring up the idea of modern day and today, this is something that is, I think, shocking for a lot of people in the West, where, the idea of possessions is still in the world of woo-woo, right? Where the presumption is that someone who's possessed is schizophrenic or has another form of mental illness. And that these things that are being done to them are barbaric. When a Catholic priest or a person of another tradition tries to exorcise them, this is barbarism. Many of us in the West see it that way. Whereas exorcism is a living tradition in Islam today. They're televised. They will be televised in Indonesia, in Saudi Arabia, Morocco, because it is presumed exorcism is done very commonly today. My Sufi order in West Africa does exorcisms because the idea is that these people that scientists will say this person is mentally ill is actually being attacked and possessed at times by this jinn entity. I'll give you a story of.
Well, let's do that. We'll come back. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Kamran Pasha, our guest tonight, a Sufi mystic, will talk to us about possession and exorcism of a jinn. There's been many different theories bandied about that even in evoking the name of Jesus Christ or God has no effect on these beings. Is there truth to this? What exactly are we dealing with? We're talking about the Dark Djinn tonight. Our guest, Kamran Pasha, when we return to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. Hey folks, don't forget the Curse of Lizzie Borden is coming to Discovery Plus and Discovery Plus UK September 10th, 2021. I'm joined by Sam Beltrusis, an actual descendant of Lizzie Borden, as well as psychic medium Chris Fleming, Luann Jolly, paranormal investigator and EVP specialist. She brings in some EVP you have never heard before in one of the most chilling examinations of the supernatural. And a lot of what we're discussing tonight seems to be falling in under this umbrella. I wish we would have had our guest with us to discuss and deal with this case when we were on the ground, because I think knowing now and just hearing the little bits that we've been hearing from our guest, I think there's a lot more to this story. We certainly believe so. Tune into the Curse of Lizzie Borden, September 10th. On Discovery Plus and Discovery Plus UK. Kamran Pasha, our guest tonight. Kamran, you have been in the field. This is not just research and from the safety of your own home. You have been out and confronted this force. I don't want to call it evil force because, as you said, it's like all things. There's good, there's bad, and there's anarchy and chaos in between. Talk to us about some of your experiences in dealing with the jinn.
Well, my Sufi order, like I said, it's in West Africa, in Senegal, and I've been there multiple times. And so my order deals a lot with jinn in a very practical way today. So I'll give you a story of a close friend of mine who is actually my translator with my Sufi teachers. They speak Arabic and French and the local African languages. They don't speak English. And so I use my friend Muhammad as my translator. And so this is Muhammad's brother. And this is a story that he shared with me directly, which it happened only a couple of years ago. His brother was a sort of prize fighter, boxer in West Africa, and was up and coming and rising, and was up for the big national championship in Senegal. And suddenly, before the bout, he started behaving very strangely. He started talking in a language no one could understand, and no one could communicate with him. And he started behaving very erratically. And they're like, "What's happening to him?" And people, and the doctor said he's had some kind of schizophrenic or mental breakdown, and they, maybe some medicine will work, but the medicine didn't work. And so they didn't know how to communicate with him because he seemed in a fugue state and was behaving bizarrely. And so they brought to my Suffi master, who took a look at him and said, yeah, no, this is not a mental illness. This is an actual jinn attack. And we would find out later the reason for it. But what they did was they performed the Islamic exorcism rituals, which compose of reciting various verses from the Quran through the Suffi master over them. And it was very much like what happened in The Exorcist. Body writhing, screaming, no, that kind of thing. And then the entity was out, and my friend's brother returned to normal, and he had no memory of the week or so that he was out. Right, he had no memory, but he revealed to them what had happened before. And so, West Africa, the voodoo tradition comes from West Africa. So you'll see many traditions that are the origins of voodoo that are still living practice there, right? And so he was insecure about winning this fight. So he went to essentially a voodoo type master who gave him a ritual to get the power of an entity to give him the strength to win this fight, right? Of course, the entity was a jinn. Of course, it said, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to take you. You want me to win? I'll just take over your body. That's how I'm going to win, right?" And so he was like, he has used this form of magic, which essentially made him lose some control of himself. So that's not an ancient story from the 1800s. That happened a couple of years ago to a close friend of mine, his family. And so this is a living tradition. And you mentioned Lizzie Borden, which I'm very excited to see the special, because I've stayed at Lizzie Borden's. I stayed in the room where the poor stepmother was killed. And I am of the opinion that people have talked about that there is some kind of entity there. And I am of the opinion there is some kind of dark jinn there, which may have possessed and influenced Lizzie and her sister over that time. That's my opinion, having stayed there. There's something there that's not normal. And I love to see what you guys discovered. But that is my perception of it, that there is an entity that had, I think Lizzie may have been in a fugue state. I do think Lizzie Borden killed them. I do believe that. I also believe she wasn't acting of her own free will. I think there was a fugue state involved. But I'd love to see what conclusions you come, and I know that will be revealed in a few weeks.
I would love to let you know if you're onto something or on something, but I'm pretty sure that people will swing in through my windows and drag me away before I have a chance to confirm or deny any of that. But
the Discovery Plus lawyers are very good at their job.
That's right. They're watching. Like so the jinn, they're everywhere. All right, so he called in this being, right? This is almost like the case of the monkey's paw, right? You with every wish there comes a curse. You call him, sure, I'll give you this power, but in exchange, he gets to live the physical form for a while, and all chaos breaks loose. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about this then, when you confront and you're dealing with this and you've entered into an agreement. How much harder is it to exercise a being like that?
Well, because they're tricksters in nature. They don't see themselves as bound to an agreement. They see you as a sucker, right? And who's like, all right, you put your spiritual defenses down to let me in. I'm just going to have fun with now. Because think of, even the good jinn are essentially, they're fire. They're made of fire. So fire is tricky, right? You can't control fire. It crackles and it goes all over the place. And so even the good ones, as we would call them, are tricksters by nature. It's their nature. They're not stable entities. And so dealing with them is a very dangerous phenomenon, even ones that are not inherently malevolent. This is who they are. It's the scorpion and the frog. This is who I am. You can't stop me from being this. I'm sorry if I hurt you. But I want to give you an example from a close friend of mine who's a Catholic who encountered a jinn, right? To answer an earlier question you raised, there are moments where people say these things are not influenced by the name of Jesus. So this is exactly what happened to a friend of mine who is a Catholic. He's a very traditional Catholic. He's an old school conservative Catholic, pre-Vatican II. He very much believes in my religion is right. Nobody else's religion is true. My paradigm is correct. Yeah, I mean, I've seen him talk at some of these paranormal events where people talk about elementals and things. He goes, well, I don't believe any of that. There's only angel and jinn. So, okay, that's his worldview. But this worldview was shaken when he's part of a group of Catholics that had been part of sort of an authorized group that could do exorcisms within the Catholic Church. So he has lots of incredible experiences that sound very much like The Exorcist, like the movie and the book. But then he had this one experience that shook him up, and he shared this with me personally. It was he shared it about 5 or 6 years ago. And so it was not that long ago. He had been called by the Catholic Church to investigate an incident that was taking place in Southern California. I think it was in San Diego, it wasn't in Los Angeles, but Southern California. It was actually a Muslim family that had called the Catholic Church because they didn't really know what to do, because a lot of Muslims are disconnected today from this spiritual tradition, and they don't really, coming in America, they sort of forget about the jinn, they don't take it seriously, and then this happens. So their son had found an ancient book of Arabic magic that in his grandfather's personal collection that he shouldn't have been looking at. And he opened it, of course, being a teenage kid. He started reciting some of the spells, and that unleashed a jinn who then possessed him. And so, the boy was acting schizophrenically. He was acting multiple personalities and very dangerous and physically dangerous. And he had been hospitalized, and the doctors couldn't help him. And the being that was talking through the boy began to convince the parents, this is not mental illness. There's actually a possession happening. But being disconnected from the heritage and tradition, they didn't know who in the Muslim community to turn to. So they called the Catholic Church, because that's what you do. Okay, exorcism, I guess we've all seen the movies, called the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church sent my friend over there to deal with this situation. And he arrived, and he talked to the entity, and the entity spoke back to him in English, but was mocking him. He goes, "Oh, it's another one of these demons. I know that. I've dealt with this thing before." So he starts doing a sort of initial rite of exorcism just to try to drive it out. And the entity just laughs in his face, literally laughs in his face, and says, "Yeah, I don't believe any of that. You're going to try to do this, Father, Son, Holy Ghost stuff on me. It's not going to work," right? Just laughs in his face and has no effect. And this shakes up my friend, who is used to it working. And it's very much in his paradigm that this is the only truth, and this is how you handle it, and this always worked. And he couldn't get this thing out. So finally, the Catholic Church, which is perhaps today a little more, open than he is in his philosophy, said, maybe we can't handle this. We got a Muslim imam in our Rolodex. And so they contacted this imam, I believe in Canada, who had experienced Islamic exorcism, Suffi exorcism. And they flew him out, and he flew out to San Diego, and he used a traditional Islamic exorcism with the Quran and all that. And the thing was out. And the teenager's like, "Where have I been for the last 6 months?" He had no memory, right? And so this shook up my friend, because he had never experienced anything outside of his very conservative paradigm of the cosmos. So I said, look, I will never say to you the Catholic religion is wrong. I would suggest to you that maybe your understanding of cosmology is somewhat limited, right? Maybe there are other entities within the Catholic faith that you're just not open to, because you have limited what you think is out there. But God's bigger than the box we put him in.
Well, we also look at the concept that the reality that we believe in shapes the world around us.
Yes.
If I die and I am Muslim, and you and I'm angry, and you're coming in, and you're in the name of Jesus Christ and the Holy Father, I don't subscribe to that, right? I don't ascribe to that. So that's not going to do anything to me. By calling forth the energies, the beings, the religious fervor that I would be a part of seems to make more sense. So if these beings have been around, and maybe there are Catholic jinn and Muslim jinn and Jewish jinn and Baptist jinn, because there are, if there's these forms that have lived for eternity and have been mingling amongst the humans for all of this time, what do you think of the concept that then they've altered? It's you're not getting one form of belief, you're getting a multiplicity of them all, and you don't know which key you need to unlock.
Well, that's actually the Islamic belief, that the jinn have different religions. There are Christian jinn. That's an old Islamic belief. There are Buddhist jinns, there are Hindu jinns, there are Jewish jinns, and there are Muslim jinn. And, I've studied martial arts and Chinese Taoist tradition with some with Taoist teachers here in the Southern California, and they're trained exorcists in Taoism. And they've shared with me wonderful stories of exorcisms that they've done, of Taoist Chinese spirits, right? And I would consider that just Chinese jinn, right? But those were using ancient Chinese rituals that worked when the Catholic or other ritual didn't work, right? So the idea is, because these entities have a mimicking nature to them, they will tend to mimic human beings. They will associate with groups of humans, and they will absorb their beliefs and their paradigms because they have this fluid nature. And so there are jinn that very much subscribe to the Catholic paradigm, and they would be, in my view, the entities that the Catholic priest is dealing with. When he's calling out, the Catholic priest in the movie The Exorcist, in my view, that being is a Catholic jinn, and in its mind, it is the devil, it is Legion, it is all those things, but then the Catholic ritual works on it. But there is a danger within that as well, which is that these beings, because they are heavily influenced by that human dynamic, their powers can be increased or decreased by our level of belief in them. So for my conservative Catholic friend, he views demons as a terrifying thing that could kill you, as at the end of the Exorcist movie, where it kills, the two priests essentially. And he sees that the work he does is life and death struggle, and it's very frightening. Muslims, jinn can be very powerful and do very dangerous things, but we don't see them in the same way as this all-powerful, entity. The Quran says Satan, the jinn, are weak. It says it is weak. It's a weak entity. And so the moment you shine divine light on it, it's not able to withstand it. And so we have this belief paradigm that while these things are incredibly dangerous, if you handle them appropriately with God's power, you don't have nothing to fear from them. So that diminishes their power. But if you believe them to be this incredible being that the Archangel Michael is struggling with, then you give them a lot of power and they feed on it.
I'm curious, when you talked about the boxer who drew in this power to win. Are you familiar with the 27 Club?
I've heard of it. Are you referring to those who pass away at 27, the
right.
famous people? Yes.
Robert Johnson, the Crossroads moment, right, where he supposedly sold it. Here's this barely pick and grinner guitarist who goes away for a very short time and comes back, this whiz kid of a musician. Then you look, and for folks that are not familiar with it, welcome to the wormhole. You'll be online all night tonight reading about this. But the 27 Club, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, those are just some of the more famous names. There are many more that you can find that are part of that, that fall under that umbrella. Do you think that was the payback that these people may have inadvertently called forth for this fame, for this grace, and in exchange it cost them their life at the age of 27? And do you know, in your belief system, is 27 any kind of magical number or a powerful number that would make sense for that?
Well, these entities can make these kinds of deals. They can, because they have the ability, what we call the jinn the whisperers. So they can whisper inside, they can inspire you, because they can essentially possess you, they can come into you and give your fingers an ability you didn't have, so you become a great guitarist, or change your voice. They have that ability, and they have the ability to influence other people so that suddenly you start becoming famous, right? They have that ability, and they are tricksters by nature, so they enjoy messing with you. Like when they give you something, they'll take something away. And again, if your belief, a lot of things, again, we're living in a Western tradition where the deal with the devil has this connotation that you could sell your soul and you could lose your life. And we live in a Western culture where that is very much in the culture, even if one claims not to believe it. So if that is your paradigm, a lot of these artists, I work in Hollywood. There is dark occult here. I know it for sure. I've experienced it. There are dark occultists here. There are famous people that use dark entities here. When I was in Bulgaria just last week, I met a Suffi imam, a Suffi teacher, who said to me, yeah, you guys got a lot of dark occult in there amongst the actors. I said, yeah, he knew that in Bulgaria, right? And so, yes, that is a real thing. I do believe there are people making deals with what I call the jinn, and part of the deal is they give up their lives for this brief moment of fame. And so that is a real phenomenon. There's Sufi numerology, there's Western numerology. I think the number 27, if we look at Pythagorean numerology, which is sort of universal. The Pythagoras was a mystic himself, and Pythagoras, 27 adds up, 2 plus 7 is 9. So 9 is a number of completion in the Pythagorean numerology. So it makes absolute sense that would be the age in which the completion of a cycle. The other cycle is 36. Marilyn Monroe died at 36. A lot of major people die at the age of 36 who are famous. So 3 plus 6 is 9. Again, the completion of a cycle.
Oh, good grief. So when I get to 54, I got to start sweating it in November.
Just take a lot of zinc and vitamin D and you're good to go.
Oh, my God. Don't even put that thought in my head. No, that's fascinating. Well, now, you've obviously encountered the jinn.
Yes, I've had direct experience with them, actually recently.
The demonic realm, the difference. Have you ever encountered that? And what is the difference between the demonic and the jinn in an exorcism or a possession case?
Well, again, I would view the demon as just one of the very evil versions of jinn who are followers of Satan, right? Who are very specifically part of that group that rebelled against humanity, that won't acknowledge human beings, and views us as the Quran calls it. They see us they see us as an enemy. They see themselves as our open enemy. That's the phrase the Quran uses. They're openly our enemy, and they cannot be reconciled to human beings. And I had my own experience with sort of trickster jinn throughout my life. I learned from my Sufi masters, because I had a lot of very strange experiences in my family. They said, well, it's because of your great-great-grandmother. And my great-great-grandmother was a Sufi mystic in India in the 1800s, right, during colonial India. And apparently she was a very famous Sufi mystic living in a little village. People would come to her from all over the country for healings and, spiritual guidance. And she would work with positive jinn who would help heal the people, right? That would be part of her mystical tradition. And so my master said, hey, some of those jinn stuck with your family's lineage, and they stick around and they like to show themselves. And so I've always had very strange phenomena where I have a lot of what you would call apportation. Things appear and disappear in my home. That's been going on and so that's a funny story I will share, then I'll share the dark story. The funny story I'll share is I had a friend visiting me in Los Angeles, and then, when it was time for them to leave, she put her keys on the table and was about to go get her luggage or whatever. And then I told her the stories about, you just be careful. I've got this jinn in my house that, it actually likes pretty girls, so it might attach to you. And I was saying that almost jokingly. And then when she came to got her luggage, the keys were missing, and they were right there on the table. I saw her put them down, and we looked all over for half an hour. We couldn't find her car keys. What's going on? Finally said, I think the jinn took it, because I've had these apportation kind of things. And she's just a normal white American woman, Christian. And she says out loud, okay, Mr. Jinn, Ms. Jinn, whatever you are, can you please return my keys? I have to go. And we both looked, the keys were back on the table. They just reappeared. So she's like, okay, I'm not going to visit you again. That's the kind of, I've had a lot of that kind of stuff. And, it's just, you go with it because it's there, but it's more of a trickster stuff. It has not felt evil. I'm
glad my children aren't listening, because, I've had 11 jinn living under my roof at one time or another, because where's Dad's pudding cup? I don't know. It's gone, Dad. Where's Dad's car key? I don't know. My stuff's always going missing, but I don't think it's supernatural. I just think I've got jerks for children, Cameron.
You just have kids who love you and want to have fun with you.
I'm plagued with my own form of jinn. But all right. So, right. So there is a playful nature.
Yeah.
I do want to tell you, though, in watching this video, as you were telling that story, the only time this has happened during the show, your video started getting very bizarre.
Let's see. Yeah, that'll happen.
So it was funny. There was only when you started talking about the jinn at your home that you started. So go back and watch it. Not now, folks. You can't.
No, but I will tell you this. We have our mutual friend, Cindy Keza. She has a very close friend she's introduced me to, who's a psychic in Indonesia, right? I think she may have mentioned Sarah. She's mentioned it to you. And Sarah is a psychic. She has a brother she's a psychic. She's a psychic medium. She sees entities, and her brother draws them. It's a very interesting dynamic that they have. And so when I was talking to her on the live stream like this, Sarah suddenly said to me, who's that woman standing behind you? There's nobody behind me, right? And then her brother said, I can see it too. So her brother starts drawing it, and they drew the picture, and it turned out to be, my sister has seen this entity. It takes the form of a woman with very long hair, dark hair. And she showed me the picture. I was like, yeah, my sister described that. I showed my sister the picture. He goes, oh, that's the thing that I've seen in your house. Right. And so that's an interesting phenomenon that happened there. But that's, again, the trickster jinn that doesn't seem to be an enemy. It just seems to be playing with me. And my masters say that goes back several centuries as part of your family lineage, and you just got to deal with this. It's like it's coming with your family, and you have to deal with it. So the dark thing that happened.
Oh, wait. No, I've got to follow up on that, and then you can get into the dark thing. Because there are many people that call, and Tim, my co-host and producer on this, believes he has a curse. Okay. He believes he is cursed. He believes it is possibly a generational curse. Is curse? Could we be replacing that with jinn? Could it be something that is something his family struck and dealt with, and this has been affecting him and his family going forward? And can we break that cycle?
Well, curses are real. In Islam, we have the concept of the evil eye, right? We call it the ayn, the eye. We literally call it that. And there's verses in the Quran to protect you from the eye because it's a real phenomenon. You can put a curse on someone with your bad negative consciousness, right? That's a very real thing, and it can be very dangerous if the person doesn't know how to protect themselves. The most dangerous form of curse is when someone actually uses a jinn. So it's not just their bad intention; it can just cause problems in your life. They actually send a supernatural entity after you, which can cause a lot of problems in your life, right? Sometimes life and death type problems. So yes, that's a real thing. And in general, you should, if you are experiencing what you think is bad luck or a curse, you should talk to someone you trust in your spiritual lineage, because there's ways in all of our traditions to protect against that. A lot of it is about your intention. Once you've decided, I'm not letting this curse in, you can shield yourself. It's about, again, if you fear them, if there's an all-powerful being that even Archangel Michael is struggling with, it's harder to defeat that thing because you've given it so much power in your mind. But if you believe, okay, no, I'm putting a barrier up, and no, this is the limit, then it's harder for it to break through your consciousness. Because again, as a human being, you are connected to God. You are God's favored creation of that three: angels, jinn, humans. That's why the jinn wouldn't bow to humans. They didn't like the fact that that the human being is so profoundly loved by God.
Right.
And so you have that. But yeah, so I'm actually scanning to see if I can find it. Before we go, I'll find that picture that Sarah's brother drew and show it to the video, and people I think will be very intrigued to see what a jinn can look like. But yes, so on the dark experience that I had, the dark experience was actually connected to the events that we're all going through for the past 18 months. So last year, this whole last 18 months has been hard for all of us.
Right.
It's tragic. It's a lot of pressure. So, early on last year when things were locking down and you couldn't go out and, people were losing work, it was a hard situation for everybody. We didn't know how to deal with it. I'm not so sure we know how to deal with it now, but we definitely knew nothing then. And there was a lot of bad energy. We all felt it. We all felt the depression, the anger, the fear, all of that. And then, there was a lot of fighting going on, my family and friends, because, everyone's tempers were flaring at all this time, but it didn't feel normal. Like I was fighting with close friends and family members I never fought with, arguing with them. It felt ugly. And so my Sufi master said, you have to be careful, because right now, the global fear level, this is what they said, the global fear level has so increased because of these medical events that the fear energy has now become a global phenomenon, unlike any time in history. And what it's doing is that energy is opening up portals to the jinn realm. And these darker jinn are coming into our world and they're influencing people. So a lot of the anger you're feeling is actually people essentially being oppressed or possessed by people. We saw a tremendous amount of violence last year, a lot of people behaving in ways that weren't normal. And it's not just the stress of a strange historical event we're going through. It was, my Sufi master said, it was because these entities are feeding anger and irrational behavior. It's like it's on their trickster level. It's fun for them, but the energy empowers the darker ones. They feed on it. They get stronger from it. And so he said the whole world is being flooded by these beings now, and you have to be really careful. So that's what they said. So that was an objective thing. Then and it goes back to Sarah, the one who I mentioned, our friend Cindy's friend. I had talked to her a few times before, and suddenly I get a message from Sarah from Indonesia saying, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. So I WhatsApp her saying, hi, how can I help you? What's up? She's in Jakarta, and she says, so I had this vision that there's a jinn portal has opened up in your house. And she's from Indonesia, which is a Muslim country, so she knows a lot about jinn, right? And she said to me, I saw this dream, and it was very vivid, that essentially a portal had opened and these entities were actually physically entering your home to attack you. And I want you to be very careful. And I said, okay, that's a very strange message to get right after my Sufi masters had literally said, be careful, there's something happening worldwide. Now it's very personal. There's something happening in your house. So the next day after I got this message, I started noticing I live in a lovely apartment in Santa Monica. You can see some of it here, right by the beach. It's a lovely little place. And suddenly there were huge black flies started appearing all over my place. It's like from the movie,
Amityville Horror, right?
Horror, right? These huge black flies were appearing. And I've never had an insect infestation. These massive black flies, big ones, were appearing. And I kept swatting them. And I would swat them and another one would appear. It'd always be one flying around. The moment I would kill one, another one would appear. And they were all over my house for several days. And no matter how many I killed, they kept appearing. And at one time, I killed one and I turned and I swear I saw it appear from thin air right in front of me. Like there was nothing there and suddenly there's a fly there. And I was like, okay, this isn't normal. And so I called Sarah in Jakarta. I said, is this what you're talking about? She's like, oh yeah, they're taking the form of flies. They're not flies. They're actually jinn taking physical form. There's a portal that's opened in your place that your Sufi masters, I guess, were warning you about. And they're coming in and they're taking the physical form of flies to get into this world. I was like, well, that's not good. I don't want to deal with this. So how do I solve it? And she goes,
quick note to myself: do not visit Cameron's apartment when you go to California. Okay, I'm good.
Well, but the story has a happy ending.
Okay.
It has a happy ending. And so I was like, how do you deal with this, right? And so she said something that's actually, I think many people in the audience right now will recognize this as an old wise story from their great-grandma. Put a bowl of salt in front of your door and a bowl of salt on your kitchen table. When I was in Bulgaria, I told a story to some Christian mystics I met last week. They're like, oh yeah, salt is an energy blocker that blocks dimensional. And this is a worldwide tradition that salt can block interdimensional things. So I'm going to show you a picture. So this is the photo I took of the salt. I poured salt after, and this was the text that I sent Sarah. Like I was like, is this okay? Is this salt what you need? She's like, yeah, that's good. Put it in your door. And I had just swatted a huge fly. It fell into the lampshade, into this lampshade. And I was like, all right, I'll throw it out in a second. But first, let me put this salt down. So I swatted the fly, put the salt down. I turned, the fly's body had vanished. All the flies' bodies that I'd killed had disappeared from the apartment. They weren't there anymore. They had vanished the moment I put the salt down. And they never came back. And so they weren't flies. She said they're not flies. They appear to be flies. The moment you put the salt down, their body will disintegrate because they're jinn taking temporary form to enter the world. And the salt will block that. And the bodies were gone. These huge, disgusting flies were just gone. So,
wow.
And so that was an experience I had here in Santa Monica. And it was strange because I had received a warning from my Sufi masters in Africa. Then I get this direct call from Indonesia. And I was experiencing this phenomenon. I take care of my mom. She stays with me. She was getting freaked out. She's like, what's happening here? Because there's these clouds of flies. It was the Amityville horror. And we couldn't get rid of them. And so now
would this portal have opened whether you live there or not? Or was it drawn to you because of your work and belief system?
I think the odds are it was drawn to me because I'm already aware of these things. And, I've been thinking about the sort of occult basis for a lot of the historical events we've been enduring, that there's something darker happening beyond the sort of official headlines of what's going on. And so I also have this family lineage of jinn, which maybe tricks or jinn around me, it glommed onto us. It decided that this is a guy, this is a light. It's like light in the darkness. I see this guy. I'm going to come in through that way.
Well, we're going to go to questions in a few minutes, folks. So I haven't been paying attention. So when I say now, if you have questions, start cycling them, but not yet. I want to revisit a moment. When we started doing Darkness Radio in 2006, there was a lot of talk of something, an oncoming change.
Yeah.
And every year it's gotten more powerful. People are like, I feel it's here. It's coming close, and we're getting closer. Do you think that with the tragedy that's befallen our world in the last year and a half, 2 years, that this was the change that, and we're talking the Pope, we're talking religious leaders from all different sects, mediums, psychics, we're sensing this, and many of them were thinking it was a good change. Do you think that it was this moment that we're living through now that they were sensing? Is this Gaia's shaking the fleas off its back for the next evolution, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, I do think ultimately the final outcome of this experience will be a good one, but it is an experience that we have to go through. World War II, the final outcome was the world got connected and a lot of things came out of it that were good, but World War II itself was horrific, and those who endured it was horrific. We're in a similar pattern. We're in a pattern to an event that's actually global now, but from the United States perspective, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, and I think these events that are happening right now are of that caliber because our lives have changed in radical ways that none of us could have imagined, and we wonder if we'll ever get our lives back. And we're all arguing with each other right now, almost like a war, where people have beliefs about the health events, they have beliefs about the restrictions that were put on that are diametrically opposed as to whether these things are coming from good people who are trying to help us or from sinister people who are trying to curtail our humanity and our freedom. And good-hearted people have diametrically opposed beliefs about this. And so it's essentially a civil war in culture right now that we're experiencing. So yes, we are going through an event, and it was my Sufi master said, this is a global event. And the jinn are taking advantage of that. So yes, within my tradition, my Sufi masters had actually warned back in January of 2020 that something, even before sort of it became lockdown time in America and Europe. Back in January 2020, they did a national speech in Senegal saying, everyone, something very dark is coming. Be very ready. This is a dark period we're about to enter. So they did that before it became sort of, by March of this year, it had become everyone's lives. But in January, it was still, I was traveling in February, everything was normal. And yet they gave out this warning, and it's what happened. So I believe, yes, we are going through a period. You're noticing a lot on YouTube and other places. People are quoting a lot. They're talking about, is it the rise of the Antichrist? In Islam, we have the Antichrist story as well, that there's an actual Antichrist that rises at the end of time and that Jesus returns and defeats him. So it's called Dajjal, which means the false Messiah. So is that the era of Dajjal? Muslims are saying that. And even in the New Age world, people who follow Rudolf Steiner, who's a very popular sort of, modern mystic, Rudolf Steiner had all these stories about the rise of Ahriman, which is a Zoroastrian term for the evil deity, right? And that he would manifest, and that era would happen within our lifetimes or within a century. And so yes, I do personally believe that we are going through a major spiritual epoch. I don't think these events that are happening are normal, and they're happening on a global scale. Everyone is affected by them. And I think it's because we're about to birth a better world, but we're going to have to go through a terrible world to get there. And the jinn are taking advantage of that. They're feeding off of that fear and anxiety and anger that's coming from this transformation.
For those of you listening to the podcast version of today's program, you are hearing other voices. They are not from other worlds. They are outside of Cameron's window.
I'm in Santa Monica with lots of fun people running around the beach.
Right. So you're hearing voices. You could save yourself sending me emails and timestamps, unless you hear, "I'm your Lord now." I don't think we need to hear any of it. But so we got a lot of questions coming up about this. BB's says, should the salt be changed regularly or left in the bowl for a while?
And there was I want to answer this, and a question I saw fly up in the chat, which is, if someone said, okay, I heard it's the door, where else do you put it? For me, it was the door and the dining room table, right? Those are the two sort of energy points for me. So I don't know if that's always the case, but the door is always a good place to put it. It seems universally people like to put salt by their door. They did that in Bulgaria. Could we go back to that question? I want to make sure I answered that question properly, the one that just went by here. Do you have?
Right. Where was it? No, I'm sorry. I think they were looking for more information.
Oh, should it be replaced? Should it be replaced? I think I have not replaced mine in a while, and I haven't seen these things. It's always a good idea, I think, to replace it after a week or so, just to refresh your energies. But for me, I think hopefully I've sealed this thing. I don't want to see these things again. It actually freaked me out quite a bit. And so, yeah, I would recycle it and keep your salt fresh.
Is table salt going to work, or does it have to be?
I use table salt. I was seeing chats, people saying get Himalayan salt. That's great too. But I use simple, diamond crystal salt, and it worked fine. It worked instantaneously.
And I'll mention this because I get this question a lot. People will write to me and they ask, what's the difference between blessed water and holy water? Blessed water is one that maybe a prayer is given over. Holy water is taking blessed salt, blessed water, the combining of them, and then a third blessing given unto it, so that when you mark the door frames with the blessed water, with the holy water, what's left behind is the oxidation or the calcification, whatever you want to call it, from the salt. So even though the water evaporates, you're leaving the salt cross there. So that is something to consider. That is the difference. If you need to get holy, blessed salt, blessed water, mix them together and have a third blessing given unto it, and then it'll have more of that staying power, according to most of the belief systems. Some of the questions are flying by quick. I'm trying to look at them here. So if I miss you, again, please feel free to come back. Let's see. Eli says, so if the jinn doesn't care whether it does good or bad, how should we react to it once we see it? And does that also mean a long-term attachment to us? Well,
I would, if you ever interact with an entity that you are nervous around. And I think whenever you meet a jinn, you get a nervous feeling, even if it's not bad. It's just like it's fire. You get nervous around fire. You don't know if it's going to get out of control, right? I would use whatever your sacred protection things are. There are Islamic prayers that we use. There's one I'll recite it in Arabic for anyone who wants it. It is La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, which means there is no power or strength except in God. And that is a very standard prayer used. My Sufis always teach that when you say that prayer, the angel appears and drives away, with a sword, the entity. But that's whatever tradition you're part of, use that tradition's prayers when you're very around a spirit that you feel uncomfortable with or nervous around. And it doesn't need to have long-term attachment, especially if you create your personal spiritual barriers. If you don't have those barriers, I think people, especially in our modern age where people tend to laugh at these things, their barriers are all down. And they love sort of the obnoxious atheist types. I don't believe any of this. And then they love that guy. They go right in. You go right in.
What's the old saying? The best trick that the devil's played on us is to make us believe he doesn't exist.
Correct. And that's absolutely
correct. Dick asks, Cameron, do you believe the jinn and elementals, or how do you say that, Stochoin? Are the same entity type?
I've often said that. Because elementals, as they're described, are essentially nature spirits, right? They're tied to the earth and they're tied to literally elements, which fire is one of them. And the jinn are often said that they dwell in forests, in trees, and they dwell under the water. So just like we describe them as beings of this smokeless fire, that's not earth element fire. That's their kind of energy. But they're drawn to the natural elements of the world. And one of the reasons that even the good ones find us irritating is we disturb nature, right? Which is what people say often about fairies and elementals. They don't like human beings who come in and disturb nature. I personally believe fairies are very, very powerful and dangerous form of jinn, and you should treat them with respect and leave them alone and leave their spaces alone. There are, can I give you a story? I don't know how much time we have, but
let me mention this. Knox Graves does ask, what's the difference between fae folk and the jinn, and do they share the same similarities?
I mean, I would suggest that they are different words for the same entity, right? And these are very possessive form of jinn connected to particular woodland areas that we would call fairy or fae folk. I have a friend of mine who is Indonesian. Indonesia pops up a lot. I have a friend of mine who's Indonesian, studied here at UCLA in the US. And, he's a scientist. And so he'd been raised in the very scientific, rational tradition. And he thought, the old stories were just that story. So this is a story he told me personally. He said to me that one day he went back after getting his degree in the United States. He went back to Jakarta to visit relatives, and some of his family lived in an old village out in the mountains, right? And he went to see his aunt and uncle and spend like a week with them. And when he arrived there, they said, "Hey, it's a beautiful place. It's in the woods. It's all that, and it's all safe here. There's no dangerous animals or whatever in this area. But don't go out at sunset because there's a jinn that lives in the forest that will not like you, and because it comes out during sunset and it doesn't like human beings entering there, and it can be very dangerous." And so he laughed that off. He said, "Oh, my silly uncle and aunt believing these silly superstitions." So he said one night, it was beautiful sunset. He decided to go for a walk and see the area. And he's walking into the woods during sunset. And he said, "I'm going deeper into it. And I come across this large tree, and suddenly I hear crying, a woman crying. And I was like, where's that sound coming from?" And he looked around and got louder and louder. And then he looked up, and there was a woman sitting maybe 15 feet above him, on a branch in the tree above him. He's like, and as he described it, he said she was wearing these raggedy clothes, rags, and her hair was black and all very scrunched up and looked like she hadn't washed in a long time. And I saw her, she had her hands over her face and she was crying into her hands, like weeping. And he said, I called doctors. "Are you okay? Can I help you?" I mean, he didn't know how she got up there. I was like, "But can I help you? What can I do, ma'am? I mean, what's wrong?" And he says suddenly the crying turned into this very sinister laughter, which is not a good thing. And then he said through the light of the setting sun, suddenly it shined on the part of the branches, and he could see the hands weren't human hands. They were birds' talons. They were these huge birds' talons covering her face, and it was laughing at him through these talons. And he said, I turned and I ran all the way back to the village. My heart, he said, I've never seen anything like that. I ran back and I come back and my aunt and uncle like, I told you not to go in there. It's not a story. We know what's in there. You just didn't believe it. He said, from that point on, I knew that there was another reality that science can't explain. So
sounds like the legend of La Llorona, right? I know I'm butchering that because I can't speak Spanish well, but it does sound very similar to that. You know, there's interesting articles that just came out in the last 6-7 months here. Science is realizing that there may be a consciousness to what we think are inanimate objects.
Sure.
Which, again, we talk about the elemental spirits, and it's like, you know, Native American tradition and many others believe that you show respect to the surroundings, to the things that give you shade and food and water and sustenance, because there is a living, breathing energy to these different pieces. And if you show it disrespect, does it lash out? You know, I know that he took a lot of crap for his movie The Happening when M. Night Shyamalan did that movie, and on the whole it's a pretty bad movie, but the concept of the world just getting pissed off at the way we treat it and kind of taking us out its way is not too far removed from what's going on now with diseases and viruses and everything. Now I don't want to get into conspiracy theory, folks.
Well, but there's a metaphysical thing beyond, like I said, there's a metaphysical thing happening beyond the headlines, in my opinion. So, but let me just show one thing. I finally found it.
Sure.
This is Sarah's brother's drawing of the Djinn in my house. I don't know if you can see it. So,
can you bring it up to the camera a little bit more?
I'm going to turn off my light here, so maybe it'll allow us to see better. So the light's sort of blocking it. But
sure.
Okay, here we go. Canada is allowing to focus. There it is.
There we go. Okay.
So it didn't have a mouth, but a long flowing black hair, you know, and so yeah, so that, and I showed this picture to my sister. She's like, "Oh yeah, that's what I've seen around you."
Wow.
she's like, "I can't believe I'm actually seeing someone draw it." But yeah, and one of the apportations that it does a lot, which really I'm like, please, I've actually had to say, please stop doing this, is that, you know, look, I'm a bachelor. I'm living alone. My mom comes with me when she's not. I'll find long strings of black hair all over my place, right? Just appearing like, and I don't got a lot of hair, right? And sometimes it will appear like I'm eating dinner, and suddenly inside my hamburger will be this long string of black hair, and I'm just like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Yeah, and literally like it tries to get attention, and it's like, please don't put your hair in my food. But it's just like, I know this isn't my hair. My mom's not around. I'm a bachelor. Where's this long string of hair coming from? So yeah, that's that drawing of that entity. Yeah,
you're coming up against Samara from The Ring. That's what you're coming up against.
Yeah, I mean, it can be scary. Like I think I've seen my sister has the other side, and she can see this, and she doesn't like what she can see, and she doesn't want that power. Like Cindy is a dastard, but my sister hasn't. But I've only seen it a couple of times, like in flashing moments, and it scared the crap out of me. So I'm like, I don't want to be able to see that world.
I can guarantee you right now, everybody watching this live video stream is watching behind you, constantly waiting for something to come shifting past.
Well, if there's a medium in the chat who can see it, let me know.
Yeah. Joseph Clark says, does our behavior give them legal rights to our lives? If we walk in love, is that enough to protect us?
You know, that is very much a Christian idea of deals and of legality. Like Satan is a legalistic being, right? But the jinn in the Islamic tradition are more unstable. They're fire, right? And so they you can make a deal with them, doesn't mean they're going to honor the deal, right? Because they're not stable entities, and they can burn you. So you can put your hand in the fire to think you made a deal with a fire that's not going to hurt you, but it will. But the answer is you have to live in faith and love. I mean, you have to, you know, fear is how these entities feed. It gives them power, especially the dark ones. So the less you can live in fear, the less you give them to hook onto you.
Folks, he brought it up early, and we've been talking about it for weeks. Intention. If you've got the intention of walking in a good place, good words, good deeds, good actions, and being that, you're going to repel. There's going to be some that hate you for that and may try to muck with you, but you're working in a different vibration. You're in a different place. It's like Swiffer dusters that, they're charged to draw the negativity. And you notice this, folks. I want you to think about it right now. When you're in the shittiest mood and things are down, everything goes wrong. Your computer starts failing, your phone's not working, you get this going wrong, that going wrong, your McDonald's order is off, nothing's going right. But when you take a minute, laugh about it, shake it off, realize it's just one bad day, and let's start all over and push yourself beyond that, get back into that level, because you also notice that when you're on a roll and good things are happening, they continue to happen. Yeah. So it likes when you get low. It likes when you're feeling broken, because it'll start pushing on you and pushing you down. Mm-hmm. And your depression, your anxiety, your malaise will be just so much worse. You have to fake it. And I was going to talk about an intention experiment again in a couple of weeks, but I want to mention it to you now. I want you guys to do this for me. We've been doing little experiments each week, Kamran, as you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want you to find time to laugh. You don't even have to turn on the TV. You don't have to watch a favorite movie, although those are great ways to do it. I want you to just belly laugh by yourself when nobody else is around, because you're going to look like a lunatic. Just start laughing and watch how the energy changes in you and around you. Let that out and change your paradigms. And it, like I said, just bringing yourself to moments of joy. Even if it's faking it, fake it till you make it. Once you start releasing those endorphins, your brain doesn't know. Words are power. Thoughts are power. And if you start to overwrite the bullshit that's going on in your life and give it laughter, give it light, give it love and forgiveness, like we've talked in the past few weeks, going back to yourself in those moments when you felt most broken and hugging yourself, giving yourself love, you'll start to see that butterfly effect in your life. And I hope that you'll all try that. Venge Ox asks, I study the jinn and other stuff. Last week, flies in the house. That started. Should I back off on my studies?
Well, I guess this video was partly for you then. There's a synchronicity as to why we're doing this within a few days of you having this experience. I think you should be careful. If you're having the flies in the house thing, my uncle, who's a very religious man, said he never liked to talk about the jinn, because when you talk about them, they come. Right. And that's what I'm doing right now. But hopefully I've got my spiritual protections up. But they do come, and they, it's what Nietzsche said, you stare into the abyss stares into you. Right. And so be careful if you're experiencing this. If you have any spiritual tradition, I would start using the protection of your tradition, of your prayers, whatever it is. And if you don't have one, I would find some way of communicating to the universe that you are protected from these forces. I would urge you to start using the salt technique, because if the fly thing is happening, it's, that's not a joke, and it can get really scary, because, it's like a cloud of these things, and they start getting worse, and they bring disease. They're entities, and you don't want them in your home. So please be careful. Doesn't mean you have to stop studying, but I would urge you to put your protections up and maybe take a break until these things disappear.
Now, listen, evoking them, hearing this, and I don't want people, I'm starting to see some concern in the chat room. Oh, we're talking about it now. They're going to, we're going to have to put out the salt. There's no harm in that, but say a prayer, clear your energy, call back your energy, shove out what does not service you. Hearing about it and educating yourself does not necessarily draw things to you. By watching horror movies. Right. It
will draw it.
Right. And don't live in that place of fear. It's intelligence. It's okay to learn, because again, know thyself, know thy enemy, right? You have to know what's out there, but just don't give into the fear of it. Embrace the fear, embrace what it is, show it healthy respect, but don't give it, don't feed it. Elizabeth Fry says emotions are very contagious. Angry, happiness, sadness. That's right. So bear that in mind.
Well, and I wanted to say about your wonderful advice, the experiment you did about laughter. We Sufis, we teach through jokes. It's actually part of the spiritual tradition. There are entire books of Sufi jokes that are essentially Zen koans, where the joke is told, and in the punchline, wait a minute, that's actually a parable about God and about human beings, right? And so, and it goes back again to the Prophet Muhammad, who would tell jokes, and his followers would be like, "Prophet of God, you're telling a joke?" He's like, "Yes, the wisdom is in the punchline." And so this goes back to a very ancient tradition. Religion shouldn't be this dreary, hard, depressing thing. It should be something that uplifts your soul, and laughter is one of the best ways to uplift your soul.
I think it's been funny. I've been attacked as the host of this show for being anti-God, from where I don't get. I do prayer and healing requests. I'm always positive about it. Sometimes I will take the other side of a conversation and ask, because I'm trying to be the voice of the voiceless that are questioning God, questioning where these things come from. It doesn't mean that I don't believe in God and don't have a good relationship with him. Some people will see when I joke about God or joke about religion, And you know what? They're like, oh man, aren't you worried? And I'm like, no, I think God made me and I think he thinks I'm pretty fucking funny. So I'm okay with that. I'm not being blasphemous. I'm making you think, like you said, these parables that have a punchline to them, they engage you. They elicit an emotion. And if that emotion is happiness and laughter and you can learn from it, that's all the better. That's been a gift that I know I've had my whole life, is in educating people, doing my talks. If you come see me, I'll talk about some of the scariest stuff you've ever heard, but I'll have you laughing through most of the conversation. And most likely you'll remember what I've taught you more than if I just Bueller. We're talking about voodoo economics, right? It's that will drone and kill you, but educating yourself, enlightening, and being in a place of happiness and light and enlightenment is all important. Every one of the religious leaders, including Christ and Muhammad and Buddha, they've all been students as well. So they've had to educate and ask the same questions. Hey, folks, this week, meet me at the Michigan Paracon. There are tickets still available at the door. You can find information at miparacon.com. It is your first chance to see the three of us together. Shane, Cindy, and myself from the Holzer Files will be on hand. Tim Dennis from Darkness Radio will be there. We'll all be signing, hanging out. I don't know how much hugging is going to go on because we are going to be very careful with what's going on right now and respectful of one another. As much as I'd love to hug everybody that we see at this convention, I will have my bottle of disinfectant spray with me as well. So just bear that in mind. But come on out. See us at the Michigan Paracon this weekend, along with some of your favorite paranormal enthusiasts and researchers, authors, and TV personalities. miparacon.com. You can find me at all the different events I'll be a part of this year at darknessevents.com. Darknessevents.com will list all of the upcoming events that we have going on, and we hope that we'll see you out there and we can have fun together and learn and enlighten one another. Please make sure to visit our guest website, KamranPasha.com, KamranPasha.com. We'll have that link on today's program guide for those of you listening to the podcast version. You can also see more of his works at patreon.com/Kamran Pasha. We'll have that link available on today's program as well. As we're wrapping up for the evening, Kamran, we've done some great exercises over the last few weeks. People are very worried about attracting negativity. They're worried about the world around us affecting us and who we are. In your belief and as a Suffi mystic, what can you leave us with tonight to take control of our lives again?
So I'm going to leave you with a message that I got from a Bulgarian Suffi that I met last week. And he gave me this message to give to others. And it might be controversial in the times that we're in. So I just want to share it with you. And please take it or not take it, depending on what you feel. But he said to me, in the world that we're in right now, we are, and it actually references what you said about being careful. We're all afraid right now to connect with each other. Many would argue for good reason. Some would suggest perhaps not. But setting that aside, his advice that he gave me, he said, whenever you shake someone's hand, you increase your spiritual energy field and your protection by double. Both of you do. When you embrace someone with love, physically embrace them, you quadruple it. So there's a tragedy in the events of the last 18 months where many of us, even if, let's say, we've taken all the proper medical things, are afraid to physically touch each other. And each of you has to decide your comfort level. But he gave me that message to give to others. And there is a beauty in the human contact. God created our energy fields to interact through contact. And so I urge you to trust. If you feel comfortable, be more physically willing to interact with each other, because you will receive a spiritual blessing and a protection against these dark forces, in my view.
Kamran, it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you join us, and I hope you'll come back and spend time with us again in the future.
God willing, we say inshallah, God willing. I would love to, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in to the best in paranormal talk radio. There will be no live Thursday night video stream, and I don't know how often it will happen. I am here in Michigan Paracon through the end of this week. I leave immediately to fly out to an undisclosed location, and I will be filming until mid-November on a new program with a recognizable face or two So make sure that you keep alert. And remember, September 10th, Discovery Plus and Discovery Plus UK, The Curse of Lizzie Borden. I will do my best to bring you bonus episodes and deliver you some fun. So I hope you keep tuning in to the best in paranormal talk radio. For Tim Dennis back at home, me, Dave Schrader, your host, and our guest, Kamran Pasha, thank you. Be kind to one another. We'll see you again right here on Darkness Radio.